Have you ever stared at a massive spreadsheet until the numbers literally just started blurring together? Or, maybe you've read a dense research report and felt completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of facts. We generate roughly 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every single day. That is an absolutely wild amount. We live in a world just overflowing with raw, unorganized information. And honestly, without a framework, it's just pure chaos. So, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to go on a three-part journey to transform all that chaos into clear, actionable insights. We're exploring the fundamental architecture that turns random numbers into reality. Okay, let's dive right into it. Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the data interpretation triad, then look at sources and the origin story, move on to acquisition and how we gather info, then classification to organize the chaos, and finally, wrap up with exactly why this triad actually matters.
All right, part one, the data interpretation triad.
So this triad is basically the ultimate solution for taking raw information and transforming it into something we can actually use. Because let's be real, data interpretation doesn't just happen by magic, right? It starts with a very deliberate, foundational process. If you want to perform any kind of meaningful analysis, you absolutely must understand how your information is sourced, how it's acquired, and how it's classified. Think of these three steps as the unbreakable foundation of literally any factual claim, whether you're looking at a global medical breakthrough or, just trying to figure out which used car to buy.
Moving on to part two, sources, the origin story. So, before we can even begin to organize anything, we have to ask the most fundamental question imaginable. Where does this information actually originate? Every single piece of data you interact with has a birthplace, an origin story, if you will. And identifying that origin, well, that's step one in establishing any kind of trust.
Here we're looking at a pretty sharp contrast between gathering fresh, first-hand information versus tapping into existing compiled records. Primary sources mean researchers are actually out in the field collecting data firsthand. Picture a marine biologist pulling water samples straight from the ocean or a sociologist doing one-on-one interviews. It's raw, it's original. Secondary sources, on the other hand, well, they're already compiled by someone else. Think of a student using historical census data or published academic journals for a thesis. Both are incredibly valuable, don't get me wrong, but they serve completely different functional roles in our interpretation journey.
Okay, on to part three, acquisition, gathering information.
Acquisition is really all about the how, the systematic gathering of information. And it's honestly fascinating to trace how this has evolved over time. We started out with traditional systems, physically handing out questionnaires or filing administrative records in those huge clunky cabinets. Then, we leveled up to digital systems, deploying online databases and sensors to gather information way more efficiently. But modern automated tools, that's where it gets truly incredible. Today, tech like the smartwatch on your wrist, IoT devices, and massive big data platforms are capturing info in real time. We're just constantly pulling in this continuous, living stream of facts and figures.
Next up, part four, classification, organizing the chaos.
All right, so we've got this massive pile of raw information. We know exactly where it came from, and we've systematically captured it using some really incredible tech. But if it's just sitting there in a giant digital pile, it's essentially useless to us. So how do we give it some interior design, so to speak, and sort it into meaningful, workable categories? We do it by filtering all this chaos through specific pillars to create perfectly manageable buckets. First up, by nature, is the info qualitative, meaning it's descriptive and non-numeric, kind of like a written movie review, or is it quantitative, numeric and measurable, like a quick 5-star rating? Then, by source, which we touched on a minute ago, is it primary and original, or secondary and derived? And critically, we sort by time reference. Is it cross-sectional, giving us a snapshot of right now, or is it longitudinal, tracking changes over, say, a decade? By filtering raw information through these specific categories, all that chaos immediately starts to take on a clear, readable structure. Now, let's look a bit closer at measurement scales, because these dictate exactly how we read the math behind those numbers. Nominal data is simply organized by labels or names, like organizing cars by color. Ordinal data introduces an order or rank, like coming in first, second, or third place in a race. Then we step up to interval data, which features equal units of measurement, but without a true 0 point. Think about measuring temperature in Fahrenheit. And finally, ratio data, which has equal units and a true 0, like measuring physical distance. Knowing exactly what scale we're using tells us what kind of complex mathematical analysis we're actually allowed to perform.
And that brings us to part 5,
Why the triad matters.
The crucial takeaway here is that you literally cannot skip any step of this architectural build if you want your information to actually hold up under scrutiny. Sources provide the origin, acquisition defines the exact gathering method, and classification structures the data for interpretation. They have to work together in total harmony. If you've got a fantastic source but terrible classification, your analysis fails. Got a great structure but a flawed acquisition method? Yep, your analysis fails there too.
And hey, this isn't just theory. Following this exact three-part process guarantees that the analysis shaping our real world is actually trustworthy. When we respect the triad, we ensure our analysis is valid and reliable. And it's that reliability that generates the insights guiding actual policy, directing governance, and pushing forward academic inquiry. Basically, the decisions that shape our society rely entirely on the integrity of this very triad.
So now that you know the journey, I really hope you look at the facts, figures, and news around you in a completely different light. Next time you see a bold headline or some viral statistic pop up on your feed, run it through the triad. Ask yourself, where was this sourced, exactly how was it acquired, and how has it been classified? Because in a world pretty much run by algorithms and endless data streams, the person who understands the blueprint is the one who controls the truth. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.